Greetings, students. Today's lesson is actually two in one. The first lesson will be the location of the Caribbean, and the second lesson will be the definition of the term Caribbean. All right, so two lessons in one for this PowerPoint presentation. All right, so we move on to lesson two, even though we're doing one lesson together. And we're going to be looking at the definition of the term Caribbean. Okay, so our objective at the end of the lesson should be students should be able to define the term Caribbean at least 5 ways. All right, so it's geographically, geologically, historically, politically, and diasporically. All right, now what this is suggesting is that the Caribbean can be defined many different ways. So for exam purposes, you should be able to describe them all 5 ways. All right. In the multiple choice exam, you also have to pay attention because they could also give you a question and they could define the Caribbean, and then they would say to you, based on this definition, you need to identify what is the main basis upon which they are defining the Caribbean. So you should know the elements of geographical definition. You should know the elements of geological definition. You should know the elements of historical, political, and the diaspora definition. Additionally, at the end of this exercise, we're also going to participate in our first writing exercise. And that's when I'm going to expose you to how you write to pass the Caribbean Studies external examination, right? So you're going to be introduced to what the questions are like. We have type A question, type B questions, and actually how you answer them, and the answer should be in such a way that you write what is called near perfect essays, so you're able to maximize those marks. I don't want to see, I've been having 100% passes for Caribbean Studies for the longest while. We have had several A's and ones. There was a year, I think it was Iqbal year, when we had, there was no, I think there was no 5, I think, and there was only probably about 3 4s, but it was just 1s, 2s, and 3s. That is the year that I want to, I want to see that. I want to see that relived with you guys. All right. And I believe that you can do it. And I want you to work hard. And if everybody starts out by saying, I want a 1, and giving you the tools, and giving you all that you need to be able to make this possible, you just have to apply yourself. All right. So let's go. we're going to define the Caribbean is geographically. All right, so we're going to use the geographical definition. I just want to say very early that all the definitions have their strong areas, they have their strong points, but they also have a weak point in the sense that they are not going to, by themselves, they cannot completely define the Caribbean. We have to take all of them together or parts of them to be able to give a full description or definition of the Caribbean, but by themselves they have strong points and they are also weaknesses. So what do I want you to pay attention to? I want you to pay attention to the basis upon which we use, what evidence we're going to use to support why they define the Caribbean the way they do. We also want to look for the strengths of the definitions, and we also want to look at the weaknesses of the definition. All right, so geographical definition, basically it focuses its definition of the Caribbean based on location. Now, what do we use to locate the Caribbean? One, we're using the Caribbean Basin or the Caribbean Sea. Okay, so the Caribbean, therefore, geographically would be all those regions washed by the Caribbean Sea, or lands washed by the Caribbean Sea. We're also using the location of the Caribbean as it relates to coordinates according to lines of latitude and lines of longitude. All right, so the geographical definition of the Caribbean, its main focus is on defining the Caribbean based on its location. What do we use to locate the Caribbean? We're using the Caribbean Basin, and the main feature of the Caribbean Basin is the Caribbean Sea, or we could also use lines of latitude and lines of longitude. Now, one of the things I want you to pay attention when you are writing is that you incorporate terms or terminologies associated with the topics that you're writing about. Now, it is similar to when you're writing a sociology paper. You have to incorporate the perspectives, whether it is the Marxist, whether it is the functionalist, the interactionist, or the feminist perspective, to make your arguments concrete. It's the same way when you're writing a Caribbean Studies paper. Now, if you're writing an essay and you're talking about geography, you must use geographical terminologies in the description of what you're writing. So if you're writing an essay and you're talking about the geographical definition of the Caribbean, you must incorporate some terms. Okay. Some of these terms include archipelago, all right? And when you incorporate terms like archipelago, when you're describing the geographical definition, the examiner will underline it and give you what is called a knowledge point, all right? Another thing you could also say was water bodies, and if you give examples such as the Gulf of Mexico, and you talk about the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean as neighboring water bodies to the Caribbean Sea, all those names, all those water bodies would also be underlined and given to you as a knowledge part, a knowledge mark. Another term that would come up in the discussion of the geographical location is actually isthmus. All right, so I'm just taking this opportunity to just say to you that when you are writing on specific topics in Caribbean studies, you must use terminologies relating to the topic area in your essay. And once you do that, those terms that you use, once they are appropriately used, will be underlined and given to you as a knowledge point in your essays. And that is part of the way in which you're going to learn that you are able to maximize your scores in the exam, in the external examination. Now, if we're using the geographical definition of the Caribbean as being the area or the lands washed by the Caribbean Sea, then the Caribbean Sea, this definition means that the Caribbean has four borders. To the south, this would be the area Venezuela, Colombia, and Panama. To the west, the areas would have been Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, Belize, and Mexico. To the north, this would be the Greater Antilles, and to the east, this would be the lesser Antilles chains of islands. Okay. Now, if we are supposed to define the Caribbean from purely geographical standpoint, we are going to find that we are in we're going to have a lot of challenges. Okay. Number one, and I'll just go through some of them that is on our slide. All right, so the first one is that what would we use to classify islands such as the Cayman Islands, the Turks and Caicos Island, the Bahamas? How would we classify them if they are not considered as a part of the Caribbean? What would we say they are? All right, so they are located, the Bahamas, for example, is located outside of the Caribbean Sea, and as such, based on the geographical definition, it would not be washed by the Caribbean islands, the Caribbean Sea. Therefore, what would the Bahamas Islands be? All right. Cayman Islands, located right off the coast of Jamaica. It's not considered one of the Greater Antilles because of its size, but it is still within the Caribbean Sea. What would we classify the Cayman Islands as? So it would present us with some challenges, okay? We'll also find that Central American countries such as Mexico, Belize, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama, they are all washed by the Caribbean Sea, but they are not considered Caribbean islands, only Belize. All right, and I did explain to you that Belize is a Caribbean country because of its economic agreement in CARICOM. Now, all these countries that I have identified consider themselves to be Central and South American countries. All right, so if we're going to classify the Caribbean as all areas washed by the Caribbean Sea, then it will qualify countries that do not identify themselves as Caribbean, if you understand what I'm saying. All right. Now, land masses such as Guyana, French Guyana, and Suriname, right? They are bordered by the Atlantic Ocean and are located in South America. So this would also disqualify them as being Caribbean. We also have the Barbados, which is located way out in the Atlantic Ocean. This too would also be classified as non-Caribbean and actually as an Atlantic island. Okay, so those would be some of the weaknesses of a pure geographical definition to defining the Caribbean. All right, guys, I had to do a quick redo. I had incorporated a video in this presentation. It's actually somebody else's work. So the fact that I now have to upload the video because of it cannot be played as a PowerPoint presentation in your classroom, I now have to upload it on YouTube. So I have to remove the video that was originally attached to this presentation. So let me just quickly say the geological definition of the term Caribbean defines the Caribbean in relation to all the countries that are found on the Caribbean plate. The basis of this definition is on plate tectonics, and of course, later on in the Caribbean Studies Syllabus, students will be introduced to the whole theory of plate tectonics, that there are three types of plates, and plates move in three different directions. They move past each other, they move towards each other, and they move away from each other, right? And they create a number of features that are destructive in many instances, all right? But for the geological definition, the basis of the definition is on how the Caribbean was formed, and it is believed that it is as a result of the actions of the different plates that the Caribbean actually rose. Either it rose from out of the sea. In the case of Barbados, if you visit Barbados, I think Harrison Cave, they have this yes, they have a little section, like a little documentary of how Barbados became Barbados, and the theory is that Barbados grew out of the sea. All right. Um, we could also say that the Caribbean is also a break off of North America and South America and even Central America, and because when we have the if we're using the theory of the world being one solid form with Pangea, and how the fact that the plates are moving in different directions resulted in what we have today, then there's some basis to this theory, okay? But let me not stray. The geological definition of the term Caribbean defines the Caribbean based on um, formation, and specifically it identifies only those Caribbean countries that fall on the Caribbean plate as actually Caribbean. We just saw where the geological definition of the Caribbean is based on the Caribbean's formation and the country's location on the Caribbean plate. We now turn to the historical definition, which provide another perspective of defining the Caribbean, and this perspective is based on our culture. All right, so this is the cultural definition, and the historical definition therefore means that it is the experience, right, that has been created from the impacts of European colonization, slavery, indentureship, and the plantation system. All right, so the historical definition looks at our past and how our past have created our present culture. So that's the historical definition of the term Caribbean. Like the geographical definition, like the geological definition, the historical definition also has its weaknesses. All right. So one of the weaknesses that have been identified is that not all Caribbean countries experience similar experiences. All right, how do I put this? Not all Caribbean um, countries experience the identical situations. So yes, they may have undergone slavery, but the degree of harshness might have been different based on which Caribbean territory you would have found yourself in. So if you were in the Spanish Caribbean or the French Caribbean, because of the existence of the slave laws, the Code Nord in the case of the French, the Siete Partidas in the case of the Spanish, it was said that the slaves in these territories had rights. Right? So the idea is that these slaves were treated better than those that were in the English territory, and therefore those students who did history, you will see that, or you'll be able to identify with the fact that when you're looking at resistance and revolt, you'd realize that more slaves in the British Caribbean actually revolted more times than those in the French or in the Spanish Caribbean, because it was said that they were treated better. Also, when you study the abolition of slavery, you realize that slavery lasted longer in the non-British territory, and even in the case of the Spanish territories, it took another 30 years before slavery was abolished, mainly because the slave life was not as terrible as those in the British. They were also saying that Bahamas, for example, was never under sugar production, all right? And there are other Caribbean countries who produce other crops, and so the experience of the slaves would not have been the same, so it would have produced a different culture, right? All right, we would see this coming out in modern day society, especially when we watch, like, say, primetime news. If you watch Jamaica news and you compare it with news from, like, the Lesser Antilles, you would realize that hardly anything violent take place on a daily basis in these Caribbean countries. And that is because Jamaica's inherited our violent actions from our past, right? We kill without, Lord God, we kill for your dinner money. You understand what I'm saying? We kill without any reservation. That was back then, and it is now present day. All right. You also find that in some areas, in some Caribbean region, you'd find that more people are more likely to run away than in others. So in Jamaica, for example, you hear so many news of missing teens just because they just run away. You understand? We have inherited these things, all right? And what we're trying to say is that the cultures might vary because the experiences, guys, was not the same under the system. When we look at indentureship, for example, not all Caribbean countries receive indentured immigrants. So when we look at the racial composition of different Caribbean countries, we realize that it is not the same. In the case of Trinidad and Guyana, for example, they were larger Caribbean territories, so they received a lot of the East Indians that came. And so that is also reflected in the population today, because half of the population is Negro and half of it is East Indian, and that is as a result of the indenture system, because labor only went where labor was demanded. In the smaller Caribbean countries, the ex-slave did not have a lot of options but to return to the sugar plantation, so they did not necessarily need to import a lot of immigrants. So you'd find that they would not have a wide range of racial composition as places like Jamaica that got so many of the we got the East Indians, we got the Chinese, we got the Maderians and all those, because Jamaica was relatively large, so we would have these people. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Barbados, St. Kitts, Nevis, Grenada, they did not have the demand for labor. Therefore, a lot of immigrants was not sent. So therefore, you might find in some of these Caribbean territories that you may or you may not even have any Chinese or any East Indians among them. You understand what I'm saying? So when we ask question like, is there such a thing as a Caribbean culture, you don't know to answer this whether it is yes or no. You're probably in the middle, because when you look, we are all practicing or different things, all right? And this is because of the different groups that came here. They would have left their mark in our culture, and we practice, whether it is in our food or music, they would have influenced these things. Now, if they were not in a particular Caribbean country, they would not influence these elements of their culture, and that is why we would have been different culturally. So therefore, to say we're going to use a historical definition to give our overall definition of the term Caribbean, we're going to find that the minor differences with us might cause this definition to be unacceptable or very limited in its or bias in its perspective. We have looked at defining the Caribbean from a geographical standpoint, and that was based on the location of the Caribbean. We looked at the geological definition, and that was based on its formation and the placement of countries on the Caribbean plate. We also looked at the Caribbean from a historical standpoint, and that was based on our culture. Now we're going to look at defining the Caribbean from a political position, and here we're using how we are governed as the guiding principle behind defining the Caribbean. Okay, now according to this definition, we have three different types of government system in the Caribbean. So we have the independent Caribbean states, and those would have been Caribbean countries that are governing themselves. It means that they were very successful in gaining their independence from the mother country or the metropole or the European country that colonized them, and are now they have their own president or they have their own prime minister, and they do their own thing. All right, so those would have been the independent Caribbean states. We also have two other political systems. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so these two political systems are associate states and colonial dependency. Now, the associate states are those states that they're considered semi-independent. So they are partially governed by an external body, and they partially govern themselves. So what you'd have is that you'd have internal affairs, things like education, things like anything that has not, everything that has to do with what happened within the country, they will control. But everything that deals with them dealing with another country, that another country assists them, right? So an example of an associate state in the Caribbean would have been Puerto Rico, which would have been partially governed by the United States. Now, these countries, Puerto Rico, Puerto Ricans are also considered Americans. Okay, so they're Puerto Ricans, but they're also Americans because they have dual citizenship. So it means that they can fly, they can go and live in America without getting like a visa or applying for citizenship. They're automatically qualified as Americans, and so they can vote in the American election. All right, now another classification of governance in the Caribbean is what we call colonial dependencies, and these are Caribbean countries who they have not weaned themselves of their mother country or the country that colonized them, and so the country that colonized them still control their government. All right, we're going to look at these classification of governance a little later when we're looking at political and enfranchisement, and so that will give you an opportunity to master this content. But when we're looking at the political definition of the Caribbean, remember now, students, that the focus is defining the Caribbean based on how it is governed, and we have three government systems. We have those those Caribbean countries that are independent, meaning that they govern themselves. We have associate states that they are partially dependent. So they control their internal affairs, and a foreign country control their external affairs. And then you have colonial dependency. Well, they're still depending on their mother countries to really govern them. All right. So that is the political definition of the term Caribbean. Of like all the methods of defining the Caribbean that we have looked at, they all have their weaknesses. It's the same thing with the political definition, right? Now, one of the weakness of the political definition is that, okay, then because of the different political system, all the Caribbean countries are not governed the same way, so there's no uniformity. All right. Another one is that not all Caribbean countries are members of the other political affiliations in the Caribbean through regional integration. So not all Caribbean countries are CARICOM members. Not all Caribbean countries are what we call OECS, or Eastern or Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States. There, not all Caribbean countries are members of ACS. You understand? So how can we say, how can we use a political definition to go across the board when all the criterion that you're looking for are not fulfilled by all the countries in the region? So again, it provides a good aspect of explaining the Caribbean, that the Caribbean is governed in different ways. And so if we're defining the Caribbean from a political standpoint, yes, that definition would be good. But again, it is limited in covering all the aspects of the Caribbean when we make reference to its location, when we make reference to its formation, when we make reference to its culture. All right, and you're going to also find when it make reference to people who were born in the Caribbean but have actually migrated and are living away from home, but they do contribute to the region by sending back remittance, or they visit us, or they have businesses. You understand what I'm saying, guys? So the political definition is a good one if we're studying politics, but it's not, it does not cover everything. Okay. The last definition we're going to focus on today is called the diasporic or the diaspora definition. Yay, we're there. We're almost at the end. All right. It has been a long one, but I hope you're learning, and I hope that the fact that I recorded and gave you my perspective, that you're actually understanding. All right. So the diasporic definition of the Caribbean focuses on um, defining the Caribbean as also those persons who were born in the Caribbean but have left the Caribbean and are living Caribbean-like life in extra-regional territories or foreign. All right. So what we find is that statistics show that the same number of people that are living in the Caribbean, that it is the same number of people that is living outside of the region. All right. So they might have been born in the Caribbean and they migrated, or they migrated from a child and they intermarried with other and they have offsprings. All right. Their children is also considered Caribbean, and you would have seen on several occasions where some of these children actually come to represent the Jamaica or the other Caribbean countries in international settings. We see this in football. We see this in athletics. We saw this when there was this this I think there was a diver. His parents are Jamaican and he has claimed Jamaican citizenship, but is actually based in England. He was actually born in England, but he considers himself Jamaican. And in the last Olympics, I think it was in Beijing, he actually represented Jamaica in diving. We also had a gymnast. Her parents are Jamaican, but she's based, I think, I don't remember if it was England or if it was United States, but she was actually born in the United States, but she actually represented Jamaica in gymnastics. All right. So what we're saying here is that we cannot disregard so many people. So we actually define them as Caribbean. And so the definition of the Caribbean is diasporic or diaspora. And it relates to those persons who were born in the Caribbean but are actually living away from the Caribbean, but they actually contribute to the Caribbean in various forms, whether it may be remittance, or the fact that they come every year, or their children come every year, or the fact that they continue to practice their Caribbean culture, like carnival. So in Canada, Carnival is actually known as Caribana. All right, and when I visited in 2017, I actually went to Caribana, and it is the same thing, the same costume, the same road march, and the same way. And on the streets, you have people selling Caribbean. I had festival, I had jerk chicken, not done like what not done like how we do it, spicy in Jamaica or wherever, but it's still can eat, it's still good, and it's good to be able to find Caribbean food away from the Caribbean. It has also helped us in our export, in the sense that because of our Caribbean people desiring the food that they normally eat when they're home, it has opened up export. So we're able to send our mangoes, we're able to send our yam or plantain or banana, whatever we produce. Don't we very patty, send the patty away because they want the patty. You understand what I'm saying? Now, when you travel go, you pack up your bag with the cheese, the patty, right? You carry the Jamaica rum. What else we carry go up there? The potato pudding. Lord man, we season up the fish. Cause they say the fish don't taste like how our fish tastes, right? And we season up the fish, and we fry it, and we put a pickle on it, and we wrap it up in the plastic bag, and we put the file paper over it, and then we cover it with the newspaper, and we carry it back, and we give them. You understand what I'm saying, guys? So we cannot ignore this community of people, and so to pay respect, we actually define Caribbean people who have left our land as also Caribbean. Like all our previous definitions, the diaspora or the diasporic definition of the term Caribbean also has its weaknesses, all right? It's just that it has fewer, all right? So what they're saying is that many of our nationals have often become assimilated, meaning that they more take on the culture of their host country, the country to which they have gone to live, right? So make we broke it down. Then twang, then pop style pan when they come back. All right. So they are more likely to identify with the foreign country because they believe that they are more civilized and advanced. So when they come back, then pop style pan we, and then show we then big everlasting phone, then big everlasting everything, and then fancy clothes, right? And then ask me how we look so whole when we dress up for goat like them. Yes, all right. So what they're saying is that in many cases, a lot of the Caribbean people who leave are more likely to forget their Caribbean roots and culture, and have become more identifiable with the foreign countries or the culture of the foreign country that which they they have migrated to. All right, and what they're also saying is that in many cases, many of their offspring are likely to take on the nationality of the country within which. And look here, guys, we do it too. Not for we get pregnant and we run go foreign, go have a baby so we can get the $300 a month. And we say that them are foreign citizen, even though the mother and the father are Jamaican. We do it. Once we have one Caribbean, one family member who live especially in the United States, we say, look here, I'm 9 months pregnant, I'm gonna have baby tomorrow. So book one ticket, me I come have the baby over there and give the baby US citizenship. And then we collect the benefit. The whole we know about it and we do it too. All right. So what we're actually saying is that those practices make this definition a weak area. Okay. Finally, we come to the end. So we have defined the Caribbean in 5 major ways. Now, pay attention to exam questions because they might say define the Caribbean, but they might tell you specifically how to define the Caribbean. Now, if they have not said to define the Caribbean geologically, geographically, diasporically, historically, and politically, you're going to use this general definition for the Caribbean. And it says the Caribbean is all the islands of the Greater Antilles, Lesser Antilles, and the Netherland Antilles, as well as all other islands in the general area, such as the Cayman, the Turks and Caicos Islands, and the islands of the Bahamas, as well as some of the mainland countries, the Central American country of Belize, and the South American country of Suriname, Guyana, and French Guyana. Yes, it's long, but try memorize it. That is the Caribbean in general. All right. I hope that learning has taken place. Oh my God, it almost took 2 days to do this. So I need to hear your feedback. Tell me if you like it. Please express how this video assists you in understanding the 2 topics that I was able to talk on. And look forward to seeing you in class. Okay, be blessed, be good. Make sure you read. Make sure you watch. There's a quiz that is being prepared for you. Okay.